Good afternoon. I'm Martha Pollack, Provost here at the University of Michigan, and it is really my great pleasure to welcome you here to this afternoon's Distinguished University Professorship Program. As all of you know, we're gathered to honor and celebrate Peter Sparling's accomplishments. The Distinguished University Professorships were established by the Board of Regents in 1947. They honor faculty members with exceptional scholarly and/or creative achievements, national and international reputations, superior teaching and mentoring, and impressive records of service. An important part of being a distinguished university professor is sharing knowledge and new insights with the broad community at the university. Doing so strengthens and enriches our intellectual life and affirms our commitment to inquiry and exploration. Today, we're proud to recognize Professor Sparling's accomplishments as a performer, choreographer, teacher, mentor, and distinguished citizen of the University of Michigan. He's the first dancer to be named to a distinguished university professor, and he's breaking new ground as he combines lecture and demonstration in his presentation this afternoon. It's my deep privilege to be a part of the audience. Professor Sparling came to the University of Michigan after a very successful career with the Jose Limon and Martha Graham dance companies, serving both as a member and principal in each of them. He went on to establish his own company while also taking on choreographic commissions and guest teaching assignments. Skillfully integrating these roles, Professor Sparling worked with companies and took teaching commissions around the world. From London to Taiwan, he collaborated across cultural and artistic forms excuse me, to develop new understandings and new ways of presenting them. With particular attention to the movement of the human body in space, Professor I'm sorry, I'm going to grab my water. With particular attention to the movement of the human body in space, Professor Sparling developed works that engage audiences intellectually, emotionally, and musically. His broad experience and collaborative orientation have contributed a great deal to his success as a faculty member. Joining the university in 1984, he co-founded the Ann Arbor Dance Works, created over 100 choreographed works, oversaw countless productions, taught full-time, and served as chair of the Department of Dance. Embracing and extending our interdisciplinary culture, he's been a fellow at the Institute for the Humanities, the Rackham Interdisciplinary Institute, and the Michigan Society of Fellows. In each instance, he has expanded his knowledge while leading others to the world of dance. In the nomination materials for the Distinguished University Professorship, one of Professor Sparling's recommenders described him as, quote, bringing such a plentitude of creative talents as to amount to one-man interdisciplinarity. But in truth, his interdisciplinary orientation leads him to draw others into his work, creating an orchestra rather than a one-man band. The melding of dance, visual arts, film, brain research, and space physics in the Enigmas project is one example among many of his ability to put together ideas and perspectives in intriguing and unexpected ways. It's not surprising that Professor Sparling's teaching is also founded on interdisciplinarity. His course in video dance is an example. The course assignment pairs students in dance and screen arts and culture. They're challenged to learn from each other and under his guidance develop as artists and as collaborators. These courses are always fully enrolled, a testament to how valuable they are to our students. As a teacher of dance, Professor Sparling is known to be demanding with high expectations of his students. Informed by his own experience at the pinnacle of modern dance, he trains students in the discipline technique that is the foundation of success in the professional dance world that many of them join. He's a passionate advocate of public engagement with the arts, and to that end, he's served on numerous state committees and commissions and received the Governor's Art Award in 1998. A model citizen as well at the university, he has served on the boards of the Musical Society and the Museum of Art and on numerous search and advisory committees. He's also, as if this weren't all enough, an accomplished writer of both essays and poetry, and so I turn to his words in closing. Writing about his work, he noted that, quote, dance is not always easy to talk about. In the text-based culture of the modern research university, it must often legitimize or justify its problematic presence. I couldn't imagine a better, more effective example of the importance of dance in a research university than Professor Sparling and his work. Peter, with gratitude for your deep and energetic commitment to dance, to collaborative art, and to making both a part of the life of the University of Michigan, we are so proud to name you the Rudolf Arnheim Distinguished University Professor of Dance.
Thank you. This is all, as you probably can tell, orchestrated to a T, so I'll have a few opening comments and then we'll get on with the show. First of all, I'm supposed to remind you to turn off all your cell phones and things. Well, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today on a sunny day. I hear that snow is soon to arrive, so we enjoy it while we can. Before I begin this afternoon's lecture demonstration, I want to alert you to its multi-channel format and to the speed of my delivery. As with many of my lectures, I've cued my talk to a constant stream of video imagery, so as I attempt to keep up with it, I ask that you do as well and allow your eyes, ears, and kinetic receptors equal play. My presentation will be about 50 minutes. To see is to believe, the body made visible. This Distinguished University Professorship, or DUP as I call it, brings me enormous personal pride and gratitude. I also understand it as an acknowledgement that a dancer has a place among this extraordinary faculty, be they from literature, the sciences, or the arts. With only 9 creative arts faculty among a group of 150 DUP recipients since the first award was presented in 1947, and among them only 3 performing artists, I count my recognition as an inching towards a more comprehensive inclusion of the arts in the vital dynamic of our university. As a professor of dance within a major research university, I have always felt odd man out or queer in the broader definition of the term. I have often felt compelled to justify or legitimize my profession among a largely text-based culture, to wow them with my performances. After all, one might assume that dancing bodies do not think, theorize, or do research. Rather, they perform an ancient art to entertain and do beautiful, exotic, and extraordinary feats in service to the music. They are to be seen, not heard. And here I must admit that I am as much at fault. I see my solo dancing as very much in the tradition of a dumb show or silent movie acting, where the man who cannot speak does everything he possibly can to speak with his body without being capable of or allowed to speak. The throat seeks the release of utterance, the hands gesticulate, the torso writhes soundlessly in its own Baroque undoings. My dancing might often appear to be a series of disparate, isolated pulse points, charting out an untranslatable sign language, a voice in the wilderness seeking connectivity and flow in the moving song. But back to my complaint. The body as a campus-wide subject of research is important enough as an anatomical object or behavioral system to be explored by the cell biologists, kinesiologists, anthropologists, bioengineers, and complex systems folk. Certainly, it is a huge industry for our medical center and prime real estate for the athletics department and its various profitable franchises. The writers and poets ponder while in a body, musing, describing extraordinary experiences that occur while in one. And even the cultural theorists have taken on the body as indicator, repository, and map of all things cultural, whether through the living embodiment of race, socioeconomic class, gender, or sexuality. deconstructionist and postmodernist theories while destabilizing our often arrogant assumptions of political and personal agency, risk condemning us to closed systems of servitude to cultural and historical powers and biases we have little control over. Actively confronting these frames, we working artists face a radical reorientation of our concepts of identity, originality, and meaning-making. Global dance seems to stand out along with the internet as the 21st century's last-ditch attempt to re-embody or redefine what a world democracy of bodies looks like and can be. Dance is capable of both revealing its DNA with every move and mercurially shedding its skins in a constant act of morphing or shape-shifting. Indeed, in our own Dance MFA program, we proclaim a new era and a new curriculum of research and action, insisting to our students and to the broader university that the moving body is to be read as a text that tells us anything we need to know of the world that produced it, even as it attempts to change or resist it, to defy it by means of radical departures from the norm, by performances of outlandish, impractical, and extraordinary behaviors cast in various obscure or cryptic movement vocabularies or systems. Michael Konjolka, UMS programming director, refers to this phenomenon as the contemporary choreographer's right to ambiguity. These dance vocabularies or idioms seem to change from one UMS season to the next, prompting UMS to produce pages of written explanations for its eager but often puzzled patrons. And although we dancers have finally been granted the intellectual heft of our colleagues and a place at the scholarly table, I can't help but think that the body has been co-opted, colonized, or, to use the key terms in our own dance studies texts, assimilated and appropriated by the university system and absorbed into a realm in which text rules. We've come a long way, baby, from being the terpsichore or orchesis club within women's physical education in the old barber gym. The body, moving for pleasure, enjoyment, or free expression, has always been somewhat suspect in American culture, particularly the male body. As a young boy, I begged my mother for dance classes, but took up the violin instead. Either way, I was considered a sissy and a fag, but playing violin in the orchestra was not quite as extreme. That led me to Interlochen, where at the Arts Academy in my senior year of high school, I traded in my fiddle for a dance belt and tights and never looked back. And now, almost 50 years later, I hover before you in various states of replication, reproduction, and simulation, still moving, yet even I have succumbed to text to perform this required lecture. As long as I preach what I practice and not practice what I preach. The practice of making dance is too dynamic, too impatient and unruly, too perpetually in flux to adhere to any doctrine. Ideas emerge from the doing, then get fed back into the physical practice to be re-embodied for more ideas to emerge, a constant churning up and reinvention. This afternoon, I will use words and images to share with you a sampler of ideas that have emerged from my work. In doing so, I hope to also provide an indication of my indebtedness to the man and friend whose name I co-opted to provide me greater distinction than I deserve, Rudolf Arnheim. Rudy was and is a world-renowned art theorist who lived and retired in Ann Arbor from 1974 until his death in 2007. After having pretty much invented film criticism while in the late 20s and early 30s Berlin, and then immigrated to the U.S. in 1940 by way of Rome and London to teach at Sarah Lawrence, the New School, and Harvard, Rudy became a friend and mentor after I invited him to visit my grad dance composition class in the early 90s and discuss with us his theories of art and perception, visual thinking, and the lively dynamics within the frame. Briefly stated, Rudy maintained that vision and perception are creative, active understanding, and that we organize perceptions into structures and form with which to understand them. Linda Gregerson, our DUP of English Language and Literature here at U of M, writes, quote, "The world you have to live in is the world that you have made," end quote. For Rudy, choreography was active understanding shaped in time and space within the proscenium frame, a world that dancers make, then inhabit, as they bring it to life both kinetically and visually. He was happy to extend with us his research on the visual arts to dance and talk with us about how the moving body activated and shaped the space over time and functioned visually and expressively as, quote, the melody of motion, end quote. Like my eloquent and articulate dance mentors, among them Martha Graham and Jose Limon, I will rely this afternoon on both words and movement to preach the gospel of dance. These dance pioneers invented the lecture demonstration, or as we know it, the lec-dem. Basically, someone, usually the choreographer or artistic director, talks from one side of the stage, gymnasium, or senior citizens' activities room, while the dancers demonstrate and bring to life ideas of composition, rhythm, design, dynamics, motivation, time-space force, the use of improvisation, ideas of movement similes, metaphors, or the quest for pure non-narrative abstraction, despite always being in a human body that is wired to read itself and others for signals and meanings intrinsic to human survival and societal coexistence or competition. For my DUP lec-dem, I play the roles of both speaker and performers thanks to digital doppelgangers and my trusty friends and colleagues here at the Duderstadt Video Studio. Jeff, I think now's the time to bring the lights up on the paintings. I will begin in the recent present by transgressing the silo of my own arts discipline for another, then jump back 36 years to retrace the dancer's steps that brought me here. I take us 300 miles north in late August of last year, enwrapped in imagery of the human body in arrested motion. I sit surrounded by a few days' worth of paintings of myself, acrylic interpretations or translations of a curated selection of selfies of my naked figure moving for the camera. My position limited both by my age and by the cell phone's vantage point in the palm of one hand. These paintings are instantly recognizable to me, not simply by the degree of successive replication of the photographic image from which they are derived, or by the slackening of flesh on my 64-year-old body, but by the kinesthetic empathy they set off in my being, and perhaps, hopefully, in yours. Each painting contains a pent-up kinetics, a compressed and refined genealogy or history that brings me full circle and back to the charged moment of the camera's click. And in that process, I experience a lifetime's repertoire of motions, of countless performances of similar gestures, reaches, spirals, contractions, shifts off vertical axis of torso, hips, shoulders, neck. I relive this genealogy at every phase of the process, whether as performer-photographer, painter, or as mere observer, reclining in my lazy boy to survey the spoils of a summer holiday in northern Michigan, spent luxuriating, basking, immersed in paints. I thought that's what I was going to get with this DUP, was a lazy boy, but I don't think that comes with it. Torsos, a subset of Western art history unto itself. Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine crucifixes, Asian Buddhas, and on to Titian, Michelangelo, Caravaggio, El Greco, proceeding to Cézanne, Rodin, Thomas Eakins, Giacometti, Francis Bacon, Mapplethorpe. Artists have for centuries defined their singular style according to their vision of the torso of a pharaoh, athlete, Greek hero or god, a Christ, saint, or martyr. The École des Beaux-Arts in Paris staged their annual torso competition as part of the curriculum throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. It declared that, quote, "We choose, as far as possible, a model whose head has character. The students will present it partly in shadow in order to accustom them to be able to render the various shades of flesh in the parts deprived of direct light," end quote. To continue with the exhibition copy provided at the Portland Art Museum, which mounted a show of these paintings last summer, quote, "The poses, whether sitting, lying, or standing, were associated by artists and models with the philosophical and political passions of the time. Thus, the torso competition resonated with the revolutionary spirit of the years leading up to the French Revolution and the impact of Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power," end quote. To borrow a line from Jim Harrison's novel Dalva, quote, "Jesus, the world is upside down and I'm falling through the sky," end quote. I suspend my torsos upside down like the flayed Marsyas, St. Peter crucified, or Holofernes beheaded, an ISIS victim perhaps, a diver, a falling Icarus, or a torso merely luxuriating stretched across the canvas, a canvas unto itself. A pose capable of stirring both passion and politics, of embodying a revolution, a body at once physical and philosophical. So why my obsession with the male torso? A desperate narcissistic attempt to preserve my aging body by inscribing it and making it visible in a medium more lasting than dance? To meet the demands of a dancer, I groomed my own torso to a T, for mid-century modern dance was all about men's bare torsos and women's pelvises. Ted Shawn and his Men Dancers, an all-male, all-bare torso dance troupe out of Jacob's Pillow, Massachusetts, performed internationally from 1930 till 40. Shawn's idea was to project an anti-sissy athletic hypermasculinity, the proud expressivity of American male physicality, in defiance of homoerotic overtones of men together in activities other than work, sports, or the military. Martha Graham, who began her career as Shawn's partner in the 20s, loved the stark cone of a torso, either gender, coiling up from the root in the pelvic bowl to extend up the jugular and break against a celadon mask in muted shock waves. The face, a movie screen of expressions ranging from the subdued, stony facade of a kabuki dancer to the deranged angularity of a screaming banshee. But then, look again. The naked torso is itself a mask, a face, an empty carapace, a shield or breastplate, and even when presented as a posturing of power or seduction, it lies vulnerable and open to be read for its essential qualities, for its unique sexual proclivities, prowess or pride, its desire to be seen or touched, or its fear of it, for the promise of the absolution from and obliteration of all shame or accusations of indecency. A torso to be read for its self-conscious posturings, as well as for the candid workings of the heart, lungs, and viscera beneath its contoured sheath. It is a contouring not unlike a violin maker's art, whose task is to warp, curl, and scroll the very grain of the wood into a lacquered corset strung with silver-wound gut, its sheathed belly made resonant with the stroke of the horsehair bow drawn down across the strings pulled taut, all for the sustained utterance, the sigh, the song. Back to the moment of painting. Positioning myself in front of a blank canvas, one eye on my computer screen, I calculate the angle and approach, shift my stance, and angle my body accordingly, see the contours of the stroke as I place the brush into the paint, then apply it to canvas. The brushstroke unleashes body memory and follows lines of motion already grafted, embedded, reawakened by vision and the alert recognition of what the flesh, muscle, and bone feel like in that moment of charged being. My seeing is intensified, brought into high resolution or focus because of that recognition, sometimes instant, sometimes gradual and shifting over a few days' time, forged over multiple viewings. I repeat my dancer's mantra that I chant to my students in helping them embody their choreographic ideas, the ruthless fact of the necessity of the eye being able to see their movement clearly before any meaning can be distilled, evoked, or expressed. That seeing is believing, the body made more visible. In the moment of painting, then, seeing is believing, is a free fall into the action of painting, the informed momentum of the physical gesture, of what will become recognizable. It is remembering the feeling and the constellation of intentions that produced the gesture back in the moment of the still image's source, in the click of the camera, when in full embodiment and the split-second decision was made to press the iPhone button. Jeff, we can take the lights down now on the paintings. With this talk, as with these paintings, I seek to understand my lifetime of making work as circling the body while at once inside and outside of it, as imposing various frames upon it while circling it from a multitude of vantage points. Opening wider, I imagine orbiting constellations. Constellations are clusters of intentions, processes, aesthetic tendencies, media, collections of tools, all circling around the same thing that is at once noun, subject, object, verb, adverb, adjective, in the complete sentence that is the living, thinking body in action. My talk today will be about the bridges or connections between a lifetime of dancing in real time, real space, on real stages, to more recent transpositions of that body or others' bodies onto video screen and multiple screens. So I begin with my own dancing body, that instrument that scopes and scoops out, displaces and moves the space around it, with strokes of movement that define volume, weight, and flow within the proscenium frame, to a second transposition or translation, once removed from that spatial reality, to the videotaped image, performed for camera or cameras, within the camera's frame, to then display on a flat monitor within yet another rectangular frame. I then spread my materials out along a timeline as a composer would compose a flow of musical notes along a horizontal staff. Yet I am composing with videotaped sequences of action and pictorial imagery that already exist before my eyes. On this editing software, the moving body and its spatial relationships within its frame are flattened onto one plane and cut, pasted, overlaid, reassembled in time, slowed down, sped up, cloned, repeated, and reconnected with transitions, jump cuts, cuts on action, cross dissolves, or blackouts. This transition from stage to screen at first doubts its own validity and assumes a former hierarchy that values the live above the digital. Can we really ever get beyond the fact that it's not a real body up there on the screen? If the best dancer on stage makes us forget that it's not real by transfixing or transporting us with her own body via kinesthetic empathy, charismatic presence, strong dance technique, and dynamic use of time, space, and force, then a dancing body on the screen has to not only make us forget it's not real as a performer, but also as a digitized body. If he or she succeeds, with the help of camera movement and editing magic, perhaps we can begin to dismantle the hierarchy or bias. To see is to believe, stage or screen. Either way, I have learned not to be so quick with my assumptions. The screen, or screens, demand and offer another poetics and a century of contexts, histories, and choices, of artistic and creative moments and achievements that rival any other artistic medium. Whether photographed, filmed, videotaped, x-rayed, scanned, or digitized, the body is accessible and up for grabs in a global culture of highly interchangeable and fluid forms of transmission, of images from one format or medium to another, one mode of performance to another. My efforts to understand or re-educate myself in the shift from stage to screen began 16 or so years ago when CRLT granted me support to design an interdisciplinary team-taught course on screen dance with my colleague Terry Saris. We were eager to challenge a broad cross-section of students with figuring out what it meant and felt like to perform for the camera, work the camera, and then edit the results into cohesive works of screen art. I figured if I was to ask my students to learn Final Cut Pro, then I'd better learn it as well. I did not want to be left out, left behind, to be relegated to the role of subject or object and not part of the transformation into a new fluid medium. And more selfishly, as my body grew older, I desired any methodology to record my efforts while I could still perform the moves and effectively embody the subject matter. I wanted to extend my performing life via the camera and screen. I also sought to ease the arduous choreographic process by shifting the scale of actual dancing labor to a fraction of the time it took in the studio, and instead spend the time in editing sitting down. I found that editing my own image on the video screen allowed me to objectify my presence and my form, and I began to address my own image in third person. Final Cut Pro offered me, and our students, a seamless bridge from everything we learned making dances in the studio. We quickly found that, compositionally, one form of dance making mirrored the other and actually clarified the other. We had not only gained a new expressive medium, we'd gained a new methodology for instructing us to make better articulated, higher resolution dances for the stage. And if we wished, we could combine screen and stage, working out yet another set of proportions, a hybrid poetics of the live and the digital. My earliest attempts at making dance work specifically for the screen demonstrate a kid in a candy store of effects and possibilities, of things I could never accomplish as a solo artist on stage. What if I could generate on the same screen more than one of me to emulate what composers of counterpoint or sound engineers accomplish by overlaying multiple tracks of sound? I'd played with this idea in 1980 with a duet for myself to Bach, long before access to green screen and chroma keying technology. In a small black box studio in Upper Manhattan, I danced first one part, then tried to remember the precise spacing and timing of that first track while performing the second part of the duet. The cameraman, Jeff Bush, likewise had to position his camera and frame his shots to anticipate the overlay of both parts in editing. "26 years later, I returned to this idea of self-enacted counterpoint. In Babel, 2006, I took a 4-part vocal score by the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt and assigned myself one voice per dancing role. The soprano, countertenor, tenor, and baritone all suggested to me different movement personae and different costumes in white. I improvised for the camera to each voice, using the score as a script, already picturing in my mind how the 4 roles would share the screen as duets, trios, or quartets to mirror in a visual and visceral manner the vocal combinations of the sound score. On sabbatical in Paris, 2007, I thought to create a video per day as a series of video carte postale or video postcards to document my aesthetic interests and site-specific inspirations while in the city of light. Self-Portrait with Still Life explored both traditional genres of painting in terms of camera, composition overlaying figure and location, and performance. I was curious about stillness, sitting, posing for the observer, looking into the camera, giving the camera agency, and measuring carefully how or when I would betray the still life, or natur mort, and transgress into motion, or life. Allegorica, staged here in this room in 2007, was an installation of 5 screens and isolated pools of light that featured objects appearing in the videos. Allegorica challenged the viewer to take in multiple perspectives and scales of the same subject, and to assemble a composite of the works over time and in a decentralized space, while wandering among the islands of objects. In Paris Triptychs, Patient Spider, and In Memoriam Shirley Verrett, 3 of a dozen or so works shot in my apartment overlooking the Seine while in residence at the Cité Internationale des Arts in fall of 2010, I used available daylight to shoot the basic movement materials to then manipulate in editing. A single moving form becomes the seed cell for fragmentation, replication, counterpoint, fugues, and complex pattern making. Paris Triptychs, left on screen, passed through many complex iterations to arrive in its 3rd section as my own take on Elvis's Jailhouse Rock. Not really, but I just like to think that. Patient Spider, to the right, morphs in a more painterly fashion, along with a lovely vocal score by Yehuda Yane, a setting of Walt Whitman's poem A Noiseless Patient Spider, and we'll see more of this on 3 screens in a bit. I'll tell you the story behind that, too. In Memoriam, Shirley Verrett, like Paris Triptychs, exploits 3 panels on the screen to present a trio of possibilities. In this case, the same mourner expressing his inner turbulence as if at a funeral or wake, accompanied by Shirley Verrett's gorgeous voice. Video allows me to once again explore the narrative and compositional device of simultaneous monologues that could be read as either existing at the same moment within the subject, or a compression of 3 distinct episodes in time and space. Speaking of the element of time, video offers me the ability to compress or reorganize episodic time, as in the last scene of Dancer's Primer, Here I orchestrate for the screen a summing up or inventory of all previous episodes, providing the viewer with a compressed bird's eye view in time of all that came before. The Death of St. Narcissus was inspired first by T.S. Eliot's unpublished poem of the same title, suggested to me by our dear former colleague Toby Siebers, which led to the discovery that Benjamin Britten had set the poem to music as one of a set of 5 canticles. I decided to perform the split personae of both narrator and Narcissus, filmed against green screen such that I, in editing, could drop in as settings the paintings of Elise Radenovic. The action follows Narcissus's transformations, martyrdom, and self-immolation through the eyes of an older self. And video allows me to play both figures, something I'd find very difficult to do on stage. And you could see this on in its entirety online. It's a beautiful score. Harp and tenor. In my never-ending quest to animate my body as malleable form and exhaust the limits of the possible with nothing but the body, I created both devant and derrière, featuring the dorsal and ventral surfaces of facings of my naked body to the camera, restricting myself to dancing only by exposing those front or back surfaces. These works prompted a paper I presented at the Society of Dance History Scholars entitled Naked Came I, Lights, Camera, and the Ultimate Spectacle. In it, I propose that there is a poetics of movement stylization, camera work, editing, and lighting that provides an aesthetic framing, and that this framing protects the naked body on screen from being considered merely narcissistic, exhibitionist, or pornographic. Should I have worried? The worst fallout was a comment on Vimeo from a woman named Sheena upon viewing Derriere, quote, "No one wants to see his old, saggy ass," with old in capitals.